Everybody, welcome back to Esoteric Ramblings. I'm Jesse Arnold, and today I'm going to give you some of my X-Men comic recommendations. Welcome back to Esoteric Ramblings, everybody. Today I'm going to be going through a few of my favorite X-Men stories or comics to recommend. Someone commented last week on my, I believe it was my Falcon and Winter Soldier review for episode 2 about what X-Men books I would recommend as they're getting ready to come into the MCU potentially, or inevitably. So I'm going to do that. Now, take this in mind through this video, that these, I'm going to give you suggestions on some stories that I think are just good X-Men reading, and some of them are a few of my favorite stories. I don't know what they're going to do with them in the MCU. There's such a broad window of how they could do this. I really don't know how they're going to bring them into the MCU. I can't wait to see how they do it, because the X-Men are my favorite comics. X-Men comics is what got me into this medium back when I was a kid. Yeah, long story short, as far as that goes, my brother had some Secret Wars and some Iron Man and some West Coast Avengers, and I remember really being intrigued by the Secret Wars comics, and I would sneak a couple to school with me from time to time when he, at least I think he didn't know I was doing it, and I was always drawn to this one character because she wore green. Green's my favorite color, and so I was drawn to Rogue in those books, but I thought she was an old, cranky old lady because she had the white streak in her hair in Secret Wars, and it was like a shorter, like 80s style, you know, like that business cut looking thing. So I was like, I don't want anything to do with her. And then a couple years later, a friend brought over some comics during one of the series story arcs I'm going to recommend, and the art in it blew me away. It was art by Whilce Portacio in X Factor issue 69, and it blew me away. And seeing the way he drew Rogue in that, I was like, oh, this looks way more interesting than these characters looked in Secret Wars. So, or at least she did, and that was my hook into comics. I've been an X-Men fan ever since, and that was back in 1991. So, that said, I apologize to anyone who is a huge fan of the animated series for X-Men and the current Fox movies. I do not enjoy those. I could do a whole rant and a half giving my opinion on those things, but I'm not going to. Just to say, I don't enjoy them. I know so many people do, and that's what introduced them to the X-Men. So for that fact, I'm glad those things exist. I'm glad those things are out there for people who didn't get a chance to get into them, into the comics like I did when I was younger. I'm glad the cartoon and those movies exist to help people introduce them to the whole X-Men universe of characters within Marvel. That said, they are my favorite characters, and because they have been going on since 1963, they have highs and lows as far as quality of storytelling and art, at least as far as my enjoyment goes with them. And yeah, so there's a lot of stuff to do. There's no where do I start with X-Men. I will do this. There are these things called Marvel Epic Collections that go back and collect large chunks of sequential stories from all the different titles from Marvel. The X-Men have some that go back to the original 1963 series, and they ran up to, I believe it was like the late 50s, early 60s issues, and then they started doing reprints of them from those issues up until issue, I believe it was 93, and then one came out called Giant Size X-Men #1, which was an extra issue, and then it jumped back into Uncanny X-Men 94, and that's what this omnibus collects. So this is Giant Size X-Men #1 with all the following issues. Now this is not the Epic Collection, this is a hardcover omnibus. This is where, not that the previous stuff wasn't good, because that's you know, the Stanley Jack Kirby stuff that introduced us to the X-Men. But this series is where they really started to grab onto readers and the subculture of comic fans and everything. So there's different formats in this. You don't have to get the big hardcover. There are plenty of other formats to get all of these books. So the oversized omnibuses will run you anywhere from $100 to $150 depending on how many issues are in it. So yeah, this is a great series. This is a great place to start if you want to jump in with these classic characters like Wolverine, Storm, Colossus, Nightcrawler. They're all introduced to the X-Men in this storyline. So Giant Size X-Men #1 and up. But before I'm getting ahead of myself, there's another great place to start if you don't want to spend your time reading stories from the 60s all the way up until current times. A couple years ago, Ed Piskor did a series with Marvel called X-Men Grand Design, and there are 3 very large paperback collections. I mean, they're treasury size, I believe. Or you can get the omnibus, X-Men Grand Design, which collects all 3 of the miniseries. There were 3 2-issue miniseries, so a total of 6 books for the X-Men Grand Design, X-Men Grand Design Second Genesis, and X-Men Grand Design Extinction. And there's material from older X-Men issues in here, including the Giant Size X-Men #1 and other things. So the cool thing is this book also has a lot of like sketches and different things. Now, what this Grand Design book does is it takes you back through the entire X-Men history in chronological order. For stories that got added later that, for lack of a better word, retcon stories or changed things in the past, it's all worked in. So everything up through the Extinction storyline, I believe. Yeah, I believe this like carries you up through the Extinction era of the comics. So like the late 80s stuff. After Psylocke has been transferred from her British body into the Japanese ninja assassin Kwan's body. It covers a lot of stuff through there. It's got the whole Dark Phoenix saga, you know, shortened up, and a lot of other things. So this book is really great. Ed Piskor does a really great job with his illustrations, taking you through the entire X-Men history. So this is kind of the Cliff Notes, even though it's a massive book, of X-Men history from the 60s through the early 90s, very late 80s. So X-Men Grand Design is a great catch-all for all your X-Men books up to, like I said, the early 90s. Man, this video is running out of time on me, so I'm going to go quick here. A couple other omnibuses and hardcovers to suggest to you. Extinction Agenda is one I really like. It's a Chris Claremont, Jim Lee, and some of the other creators from the time. It was an X-Men crossover. It's really good. So Extinction Agenda, spelled with an X. Another one of my favorites is the Supernovas collection of X-Men. In the early 90s, they split the team into 2 comics, Uncanny X-Men and X-Men. The X-Men title would go on to become New X-Men, then back to X-Men, then X-Men Legacy. It's very confusing. Reading X-Men, even as a fan for the past 30-something years, I still have to go to Wikipedia and different things to find out what happened where, because I don't remember, because it's so complicated. It's its own universe in and of itself within the Marvel universe. So Supernovas is one of my favorites because Rogue gets a chance to play team leader for a while, and she picks some different interesting characters to be in her team, and I think the Mike Carey and some of the other creators that worked on this did a really good job of doing things in that. So yeah, Supernovas is really good. This I didn't get until I got the collection when I fell out of collecting comics for a while, but Age of X. This is not to be confused with the current House of X, Powers of 10, Dawn of X stuff. Age of X was its own crossover between X-Men Legacy, New Mutants, and Age of X Universe 1 and 2, and the Age of X historical logs. And This is kind of an alternate world where the X-Men never existed. Mutant kind is being hunted to extinction, and the few mutants left make their stand together. So this was really cool. Again, being rogue-centric of a character myself, or focused reader, this was great. She takes on a role as Legacy, where she kind of absorbs everybody's memories as they die or when they go off on missions, so that she's kind of like the living memory, the legacy of those characters. I don't have, maybe I'll have a picture here. The Muir Island saga is what got me into X-Men and comics in general. That ran from Uncanny X-Men 278 to 280, and X-Factor 69 and 70, which X-Factor is where the original 5, Cyclops, Marvel Girl, Angel, or Archangel at that point, Beast and Iceman, went, and they're off doing their own thing, and they kind of come back to help. The school's been threatened, Shadow King's involved, all this stuff. And after X-Factor and Uncanny X-Men combine forces in that Muir Island saga, they create the Blue and the Gold teams, which set up what would eventually become the versions of the characters you know in the cartoons, and different characters would take over in X-Factor. I also really like the Bendis run on All New X-Men and Uncanny X-Men from about 10 years ago, where the All New X-Men is where the original 5 characters I just mentioned get brought back from the 60s to modern time to help the adult versions of X-Men as everything is falling apart. And Uncanny X-Men by Bendis is the kind of Cyclops and his team that's running side by side with that. And this is all after I believe this is after AVX, Avengers vs. X-Men, which was a huge fight. The Phoenix Force was coming back to Earth, and the Avengers were like, we can't let this happen again, and the X-Men are preparing for it, and it just turns into this all-out war between the X-Men and the Avengers. And there's some really great storylines in there that lead up to one of my favorite story arcs, is the end of that X-Men Legacy line, which was the X-Men that started in the 90s, changed to New X-Men, back and forth and so on. Specifically this final issue 275, because starting at issue 226, X-Men Legacy focuses on Rogue as the central character. And this particular issue, the final issue of that run, I really liked because Rogue goes into this supermax superhero villain prison, and in order to work together, she starts absorbing powers from all these different characters. And she just becomes this like amalgam of all of these different things, and it's so cool to just see her kind of go beast mode like that. Yeah. The X-Men #1 annual from the 90s book, Shattershot. This was a really cool story arc with Mojoverse, and of course Mojo, Shatterstar, Dazzler. This was a really fun storyline. Two other ones that I really liked are the X-Men series by Brian Wood and Oliver Coipel that started off this series. It was kind of all focused on the female X-Men. That started, I think, in 2012, 2013. This was a really great arc. And Ultimate Comics X-Men, not Ultimate X-Men, Ultimate Comics X-Men, which was, I think, 2010, 2011, after the whole Ultimatum storyline, by the first half of the runs done by Nick Spencer and then Brian Wood. That series is really cool. I really like when Brian Wood takes over, because the X-Men kind of have to start their own country out in the desert of the US. They're given a patch of land and expected to die, and they survive and thrive, and it's a really cool series. And then the Ultimate Universe went away. So, that's a lot. That's a lot of X-Men. That's a lot of stuff. But there it is. Those are some of my favorite X books. Of course, you've got Inferno and the Mutant Massacre, Dark Phoenix Saga, so many other great X-Men books to read. But these are my favorites, so if you have any other questions, feel free to leave me some comments. But these are my favorites, so if you have any other questions, feel free to leave me some comments. If you want to know more about any of these stories, I'd be happy to share my thoughts or some more on those. But that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. I will not have a Falcon and Winter Soldier until probably Friday night or Saturday, because I have to do some work stuff early in the morning, so I won't get to watch it till the evening. But that's it. Have a great day. We'll see you next time, and ramble on.